are no shortage of haunted or cursed items out there, but perhaps the creepiest are the dolls that are rumored to have the soul of some evil entity hidden inside. Let's take a look into these dark and eerie items as we count down the top 10 cursed dolls that have possessed people. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Charley. Charley's story starts back in 1968 when they were found in the attic of an old Victorian home that resides in upstate New York. An old attic of a Victorian home seems like a perfect place to find a cursed doll, and it definitely seems as though that's what happened. Charley was found inside of a locked trunk, and inside of that trunk, aside from the doll, there were also some newspapers dating back to the 30s, as well as a yellowed piece of paper that had the Lord's Prayer scribbled on it. With all that I've learned about cursed items in my time here on Most Amazing, I personally would have locked the trunk back up and called Ed and Lorraine Warren, but this family, they did not do that. They did quite the opposite. Instead, they placed the doll on display with some of the others that they had, and this is where the trouble began. Soon, Charley started moving, all on their own. The family would return to find that the doll had somehow swapped places with some of the other dolls around. Shortly after this, one member of the family began to claim that they could hear Charley speaking to them at night. The parents, unfortunately, didn't listen and chalked this story up to an active imagination, but the other members of the family were terrified of Charley and refused to go near. Soon, things would take an escalation when a family member began to find mysterious and serious scratches on their body, and this is when the family collectively decided that something needed to be done. They locked Charley back up in the trunk, and now Charley resides at the local Artisan, which is said to be an oddity shop that sits in Beverly, Massachusetts, just minutes away from the haunting town of Salem. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Shrine Barbie. Barbie isn't always sunshines and smiles. Sometimes apparently there might be something more sinister going on. On a Singaporean island, there is a shrine dedicated to someone who passed away after falling from a cliff in 1914. It is said that the person who passed was a German, and at the time of their passing, they were stuck on this island when their family began being investigated by the British Army. Despite the years it's been since her death, this Barbie was actually only placed at the shrine in 2007. This all happened because a local man claimed that the German girl had requested the doll to be placed at the shrine after appearing to him in a dream for 3 nights in a row. It is this story that has people believing that this doll might have a lot more going on than what meets the eye. In our number 8 spot today, we have Lily. Lily was initially delivered to a paranormal research organization with a note from the owner that read, quote, "I found her outside my door one morning with a note that said to not put her by mirrors or in the same room I sleep in. I gave her a flashlight so she could drain the batteries, but instead she made my lights flicker at night. My cat would not go near her and my dog would just stare. At times I would be woken up from a dead sleep smelling burnt toast or sometimes a sweet fruity smell. Her favorite color is red. That is all I know." Okay. That's terrifying, but it seems like the doll was in the right spot. The doll quickly started to give off major paranormal vibes. As it turns out, this group was able to trace back some of the origins of Lily, and it totally makes sense as to why she would be a haunted doll. Apparently she can be traced back all the way to the early 1600s, which is a time when figurines like Lily were left out to scare off local spirits and New World ghosts. This custom can be dated all the way back to Vikings and ancient Rome, and it seems as though Lily and her powers didn't just work, but maybe caught some kind of entity on the way. In our number 7 spot today, we have Annabelle. Alright, what is a list of haunted dolls without the haunted doll, Annabelle? It's not just a movie, there really is a very real doll that the tales have been inspired by. The doll now resides inside of the Warrens Occult Museum, where it absolutely belongs, but where did it come from? Well, there was a college student named Donna who received this doll as a gift from her mother, who had purchased it from an antique store. Donna and her roommate started to notice some pretty creepy things happening and swore that the doll was moving. They said it would appear in different places and positions throughout their apartment before things began to get worse. Donna began to find notes that said help in her apartment, and one night found the doll in a different position and covered in some sort of red substance. The girls then decided to contact a medium who solidified all of their beliefs and told them that the doll had been possessed by the spirit of someone who was killed in their apartment building. For some reason, the girls didn't immediately get rid of the doll, and the story goes that their friend Lou, who was at the girls' apartment, heard a strange noise one night and went to investigate, and he was then attacked and killed by Annabelle. The girls finally contacted a priest who told them that the doll was possessed by a demon straight from hell, and then put them in contact with, you guessed it, Ed and Lorraine, who are the paranormal investigators. They tried to do an exorcism on the doll, but it apparently failed, which is why it now is kept in a glass box at their museum. In our number 6 spot today, we have Ruby. Ruby, like many of these other cursed dolls, just couldn't seem to sit still. This doll always found itself moving around the house, and the owners would find her in different rooms than they had left her, which definitely is what led to them catching on to her haunted nature. This was only exacerbated by the fact that anyone who picked Ruby up was suddenly plagued by feelings of extreme sadness as well as nausea. After a little digging, the family was able to find that Ruby had quite a dark history that might help to explain these strange happenings. According to the former owners of Ruby, she was actually passed down in the family from generation to generation. Apparently though, when you trace back to the time that the doll entered the family in the first place, shortly after a member of the family passed away while holding the doll, and now it is believed that their spirit resides inside. Of course, the haunted doll spent a few years bouncing around between family members, but now it has found its home base, and that is in the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and the Occult. Those who have seen the doll in person have reported that around it, they've often felt an overwhelming feeling of sorrow, and it is all said to be coming straight from the doll. In our number 5 spot today, we have Okiku. Visitors to a specific temple in Hokkaido, Japan are welcome to gaze and look at Okiku, but any photography is strictly prohibited. Legend goes that this doll was originally purchased in 1918 by a man who was giving it to his sister. When the doll was first purchased, it had short hair. Seems like a bit of a mundane point, but I swear it's important. Sadly, a year after receiving the doll, the sister would tragically pass away, and mysteriously after this, Okiku the doll's hair would seem to grow, which of course should be impossible. The family ended up moving away in 1938, and before doing so, they gave the doll to the monks at the temple. Since then, it is said that the doll's hair has been continuously growing and now sits at a length to her knees. Some even claim that close inspection of the doll's mouth shows teeth that appear to be erupting from the gums. Whatever is happening here, it definitely isn't normal. In our number 4 spot today, we have Robert the doll. Robert the doll was a childhood birthday gift from a grandfather to his grandson, who was also named Robert, but more often went by Gene. The story claims that while growing up with Robert, Gene would often be heard by his parents in his bedroom having conversations with himself in 2 entirely different voices. His parents would sometimes be woken up in the middle of the night to the sound of Gene screaming, only to find him completely frightened in bed with overturned furniture all around him. Gene would blame Robert for all of the strange happenings, and at the time, no one really believed him. Gene kept Robert into adulthood, and it became what people would describe as an unhealthy relationship. Apparently, Gene took Robert everywhere with him and spoke as if he was a living entity rather than a doll. Okay, so this story is already not great, but it gets worse. Gene lived in a house as an adult that was called the artist's house. Robert would be left in the upstairs window where children in the area reported seeing the doll disappear and reappear, and they all chose to stay clear of the house. After Gene passed away in 1974, a woman named Myrtle purchased the house, and apparently Robert as well. Visitors of the house could swear they could hear footsteps and giggling coming from the attic where Robert was, and some even claimed to see the doll's expression change if someone spoke poorly of Gene. Myrtle reported Robert moving around the house on his own, and after 20 years she decided that she had had enough and donated him to a museum. Robert still lives in the museum where he is safely locked up, but it is said that he still likes to place a little curse on those who take his photo without permission. The walls of the museum near Robert's glass case are riddled with notes from previous visitors and naysayers who are begging Robert for his forgiveness and asking him to remove any curse he had placed on them. In our number 3 spot today, we have Chuckesmee. Alright, it's my favorite on this list. I have talked about Chuckesmee before, and I swear I will every time I get a chance because I love this story. It's so funny and pretty terrifying as well. well. Twilight fans everywhere will remember the infamous character of Renesmee, the child of human Bella and vampire Edward, and we will also all remember the very questionable CGI that was used in the movies. I mean, how could we possibly forget it? But it turns out the CGI wasn't the only cursed part of Renesmee's character. For much of the movie filming, an animatronic doll was used in place of a real infant. This prop, however, is now being accused of being possessed by some malevolent spirit. The doll resides in the Forever Twilight display at the Chamber of Commerce in Forks, Washington, where the movie is set. According to those who work at the exhibit, as well as visitors, the doll is now referred to as Chuckesmee, a reference to the Chucky movies, because of the strange happenings around the Twilight prop. According to one of the people who works in the building, quote, "One day she might be standing up straight, and the next, when you come in on another day, she's in a weird position." She went on to say, quote, "It's like, is she moving around in there? We don't know. But we tell everyone that the display case cover is on her for their protection." In our number 2 spot today, we have the Island of the Dolls. The Island of the Dolls is basically exactly what it sounds like, and while it is exceptionally creepy to look at, the story behind it is even more disturbing. This island sits in the canals south of Mexico City, and it is the home of many, many absolutely frightening and mutilated dolls. Even in the daylight, these dolls look creepy, with their missing limbs and heads and creepy beady eyes, but at nighttime, the island is absolute nightmare fuel. The story behind this island is quite tragic. It starts off with the only person on the island, Don Julian Santana, finding a body. He was, of course, absolutely beside himself over this gruesome discovery, and shortly after he saw a doll floating by in the water. He strung the doll up in a tree in order to appease her soul and to protect the island from evil. While this is an extremely dark story and the dolls are very creepy, the story only gets more eerie and more paranormal feeling. The Island of Dolls is, of course, only accessible by boat, but despite its isolation, many people come to visit the haunting island, and in return, there have been many reports of these tourists hearing some sort of whispering coming from the dolls. Tourists are also encouraged to bring and leave some sort of offering or another doll to add to the collection, so who knows what cursed items are being left behind in the hopes of these people ridding them from their own life. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Nightmare Doll. Haunted dolls like Annabelle and even Robert get a lot of hype, but they certainly aren't the only dolls with stories of curses and hauntings behind them. This Nightmare Doll was listed for sale on eBay, and according to the seller, the doll is possessed by a Divik, which is a malicious demon or entity. The seller of the doll is actually someone who apparently specializes in selling these sorts of paranormal items that no one wants anymore. The seller explained that the owner of the doll bought it at an antique shop, and while they did tell her about what the doll held, she didn't know what the word meant, so she took it anyway. Soon after purchasing it, she realized that anyone who came into contact with the doll was then plagued with terrifying nightmares and occurrences of these sort of shadow people. She only could handle this all for a couple of months before she handed the doll over for it to be sold and moved far, far away from her. Alright guys, that has been our list for today. Thanks so much for checking it out. I've been your host today, Olivia Kozlowski, and I will see you again soon. Bye!